Nicholas Green was 7 years old when his family took a dream vacation to Italy in 1994. Driving through the countryside at night, armed bandits mistook their car for a target and opened fire. A bullet struck Nicholas in the head. 2 days later, in a hospital in Sicily, his American parents faced an unbearable choice. Their son was brain dead. Italian doctors explained that 7 people were dying, waiting for organs. Nicholas could save them, but he was just a child. His body was still warm, his heart was still beating. In that hospital room, Reg and Maggie Green had minutes to make a decision that would change organ donation rates across an entire continent. What would you have done? Welcome to Logic Over Spirit, where we examine the deepest questions humanity faces through the lens of reason, faith, and philosophy. Today, we're diving into one of the most emotionally charged debates of our time: organ donation. Should we donate our organs to science and medicine, or does our faith demand we keep our bodies whole? This isn't just an abstract theological debate. Right now, as you watch this video, over 100,000 people in the United States alone are waiting for organ transplants. Every day, 17 of them will die waiting. Meanwhile, thousands of bodies are buried or cremated with perfectly healthy organs that could have saved lives. But this issue cuts deeper than statistics. It touches our most fundamental beliefs about life, death, the soul, and what we owe to each other. For some, donating organs is the ultimate act of love and compassion. For others, it's a violation of sacred laws that govern how we must treat the human body. Over the next several minutes, we'll explore this profound dilemma from 3 essential perspectives: science, religion, and philosophy. We'll hear from medical experts, theological scholars, and ethicists. We'll examine ancient texts and modern research, and we'll confront questions that have no easy answers. Because here's the truth: whether you're a devout believer, a committed rationalist, or somewhere in between, this issue will eventually touch your life. You'll face this decision for yourself or someone you love, and the choice you make will reveal what you truly believe about human dignity, the afterlife, and our obligations to the living and the dead. So let's begin this journey together. Let's examine the evidence, challenge our assumptions, and see if we can find wisdom in the tension between science and faith. Chapter 1: The Medical Miracle. Let's start with what science tells us about organ donation, because the facts here are nothing short of extraordinary. Modern organ transplantation is one of humanity's greatest medical achievements. The first successful kidney transplant happened in 1954 between identical twins. Today, we can transplant hearts, lungs, livers, pancreases, intestines, and more. We can restore sight with cornea transplants. We can give someone decades of life with a new kidney. One single donor can save up to 8 lives through organ donation. Add tissue donation, and that number jumps to 75 people helped by one generous person. Think about that. One body, properly utilized, can prevent blindness, heal burned victims, repair damaged hearts, and give children a chance to grow up. The medical success rates are remarkable. Kidney transplant recipients have a 95% one-year survival rate. Heart transplant recipients often live 15 years or more with their new organ. These aren't experimental procedures anymore. They're established, proven, life-saving interventions. Dr. Francis Moore, the pioneer of transplant surgery, once said, "When the body is viewed as a machine, transplantation is simply changing parts." From a purely scientific standpoint, he's right. Once brain death occurs, the body becomes a collection of functional tissues and organs. The person is gone. What remains can either help others or decay. But here's where it gets interesting. Science also shows us something else: the incredible complexity of defining death itself. Brain death. The standard used for organ donation means the complete cessation of all brain function, but the heart still beats with mechanical support. Blood still flows. Cells still metabolize. So when exactly does a person stop being a person and become a collection of harvestable parts? This question matters because timing is everything in organ donation. Organs deteriorate rapidly after blood flow stops. The most viable organs come from donors who are brain dead but whose hearts are still beating. This creates an uncomfortable reality. We're removing organs from bodies that, in many ways, still seem alive. Medical science has given us the power to defeat death in ways our ancestors never imagined. But it has also forced us to redefine what death means. And that's where science alone cannot guide us. Chapter 2: The Religious Divide. Now let's turn to what the world's great religious traditions say about organ donation. And here's what's fascinating. There's no consensus, not even close. Let's start with Christianity. Most major Christian denominations actively support organ donation. The Catholic Church calls it an act of charity and a genuine act of love. Pope John Paul II said a particularly praiseworthy example of such gestures is the donation of organs performed in an ethically acceptable manner, with a view to offering a chance of health and even of life itself to the sick who sometimes have no other hope. Protestant denominations generally agree. They emphasize the biblical principle of loving your neighbor and cite Jesus' teaching about laying down one's life for others. The body, they argue, is just a temporary vessel. What matters is the soul, which has already departed. But not all Christians see it this way. Some conservative groups believe in bodily resurrection and worry that an incomplete body might affect the afterlife. They point to 1 Corinthians 15:52, which speaks of the dead being raised imperishable. If God needs your body for resurrection, shouldn't it be intact? Islam presents a more complex picture. Many Islamic scholars permit organ donation under the principle of necessity. Saving a life is one of the highest obligations in Islam. The Quran says, "Whoever saves a life, it is as if he has saved all of humanity." Several fatwas from respected Islamic authorities have declared organ donation permissible. However, other Islamic scholars prohibit it. They cite the teaching that the human body is an amana, a trust from God, which must be returned intact. Mutilating a corpse is forbidden in Islamic law. There's also concern about the precise moment of death. Islamic burial practices require swift burial, usually within 24 hours, which conflicts with organ donation procedures. Judaism offers perhaps the most nuanced position. The preservation of life, pekach nefesh, overrides almost all other commandments in Jewish law. If your organ can save a life, many rabbis argue you have an obligation to donate it. The Talmud teaches, whoever saves a single life is considered to have saved the entire world. Yet traditional Jewish law also requires immediate burial and prohibits desecrating the dead. Ultra-Orthodox communities often oppose organ donation, seeing it as a violation of respect for the deceased. The tension here is profound. How do you honor both the living who need organs and the dead who deserve dignity? Hinduism and Buddhism generally support organ donation as an expression of compassion and selflessness. These traditions see the body as temporary and emphasize non-attachment to physical form. The Bhagavad Gita teaches that the soul never dies. It simply moves to a new body. What happens to the old one is less important than the karma generated by helping others. But even here, there are complications. Some Hindus believe the soul needs time to depart the body peacefully. Rapid organ harvesting might disturb this process. Traditional cremation practices are important in Hindu culture, and some families worry that organ removal interferes with proper last rites. What emerges from this religious landscape is striking diversity. Almost every tradition contains voices both supporting and opposing organ donation. The same sacred texts yield different interpretations. The same core values lead to opposite conclusions. Why? Because organ donation forces religions to balance competing sacred principles. The sanctity of life versus the sanctity of the body. Compassion for the suffering versus respect for the dead. Individual autonomy versus divine commandment. Religion doesn't give us one answer. It gives us a framework for asking better questions. Chapter 3. The Philosophical Paradox. Let's step back from specific religious traditions and examine the philosophical principles at stake. Because beneath all the theological debate lies a set of profound ethical questions that philosophy has wrestled with for millennia. First, there's the question of bodily autonomy. Do we have absolute ownership over our bodies, even after death? The philosopher John Locke argued that we have property rights in our own persons. If that's true, then surely we should be free to decide what happens to our bodies after we die, including donating our organs. But here's the counterargument. Can you own something after you no longer exist? You can't be harmed after death. You have no interests to protect. So perhaps your wishes about your body carry less weight than the desperate needs of living people who will die without transplants. The utilitarian philosopher Jeremy Bentham would say the answer is obvious. He wrote, "The question is not, can they reason? Nor, can they talk? But, can they suffer?" Apply this to organ donation. Dead people cannot suffer. Living people waiting for organs suffer enormously. Therefore, maximizing happiness and minimizing suffering requires us to donate organs. Bentham was so committed to bodily utility that he had his own body preserved after death. His skeleton, dressed in his clothes, still sits in a cabinet at University College London. He wanted to demonstrate that bodies could serve educational purposes after death, but utilitarianism has its critics. The philosopher Immanuel Kant argued that humans have inherent dignity that cannot be reduced to mere usefulness. We are ends in ourselves, not means to others' ends. Does treating a body as a source of spare parts violate human dignity? Or refusing to save lives when you could easily violate it more? Then there's the virtue ethics perspective. rooted in Aristotle and later developed by thinkers like Alasdair MacIntyre. What kind of person do you want to be? What virtues do you want to cultivate? Generosity, compassion, and selflessness point toward donation. Respect, piety, and tradition might point away from it. The philosopher Martha Nussbaum offers another angle. She argues we should focus on human capabilities and flourishing. Organ donation enhances the capabilities of recipients to live full lives, but it might also matter how donation affects the capabilities of families to grieve properly and honor their loved ones according to their traditions. Here's where philosophy gets really interesting. Consider the thought experiment proposed by philosopher Judith Jarvis Thomson. Imagine you wake up and find yourself surgically connected to a famous violinist who will die if disconnected. You didn't consent to this. Do you have an obligation to remain connected? Most people say no. You have no duty to sustain another's life with your body. But what if you're already dead? What if staying connected costs you nothing? Does the moral calculation change? Or consider Derek Parfit's argument about personal identity. Parfit argued that what matters isn't the continuation of the same body or soul, but psychological continuity. If this is right, then our bodies after death have no special connection to who we were. They're just biological material. Refusing to donate them is like refusing to let someone use a house after you have moved out forever. The existentialist philosophers add yet another dimension. Jean-Paul Sartre said, "Existence precedes essence. We create meaning through our choices. Choosing to donate organs is a final act of freedom, a last assertion of your values. It's how you author the final chapter of your story." But Sartre also emphasized authenticity, living according to your deepest convictions, not social pressure. If your deepest conviction is that your body should remain intact, isn't that equally valid? Philosophy doesn't resolve the organ donation debate, but it clarifies what's at stake. Autonomy, dignity, utility, virtue, identity, and meaning. Every position on organ donation implicitly takes sides on these ancient questions. Understanding philosophy helps us understand ourselves. Chapter 4, The Gift of Life. Let's bring this down to human level and talk about what organ donation actually means for real people, because behind every statistic is a story of profound loss and miraculous hope. Meet Sarah. At 32, she was dying of liver failure. Toxins built up in her blood. Her skin turned yellow, her mind grew cloudy. She had weeks to live. Then a stranger, killed in a car accident, had designated themselves as an organ donor. Sarah received a new liver. Today, 12 years later, she's alive, she's married, she has 2 children, who exist only because someone checked a box on their driver's license. Or consider Marcus, a 10-year-old boy born with a heart defect. By age 9, his damaged heart was failing. He was too weak to play with friends, too tired to attend school regularly. He was dying. Then a teenage donor's heart became available. The surgery took 8 hours. Today, Marcus is 19. He plays basketball. He's studying engineering. He carries someone else's heart in his chest, beating 100,000 times a day, keeping him alive. These stories are not anomalies. They happen thousands of times each year. Every transplant is a transfer of life from the dead to the dying. It's the closest thing we have to resurrection. The philosopher Hans Jonas wrote, "We owe the dead nothing but memory. But organ donation suggests we might owe them something more. The opportunity to transform their death into another's life. It turns tragedy into hope. It makes meaning from loss." Listen to how donor families describe their experience. Over and over, they use the same word, comfort. Knowing their loved one saved lives provides comfort in grief. It doesn't erase the pain, but it adds purpose to it. One mother whose son died at 19 said, "I can't bring him back, but people are alive because of him. He's still in the world, still making a difference." This is the gift metaphor that dominates organ donation discourse. We give the gift of life. Recipients are grateful beyond words. Donors are heroes, but is this framing accurate? The philosopher René Fox studied organ transplantation and noted something troubling. The language of gift-giving creates psychological burdens. Recipients feel crushing debt to donors they can never repay. They worry they're not worthy of such a gift. They feel guilty when donor families reach out, not knowing what to say. Some bioethicists argue we should think of organ donation not as gift-giving but as civic duty, like paying taxes or serving on juries. It's what we owe each other as members of a society. This reframing might reduce the emotional burden while increasing donation rates. Other cultures handle this differently. In Japan, organ donation rates are extremely low, partly because the cultural emphasis on bodily integrity and family harmony outweighs individual altruism. The dead belong to their families, and families often refuse donations even when the deceased had agreed to it. In Spain, which has the world's highest donation rate, they use an opt-out system. Everyone is presumed to consent unless they explicitly object. This simple change dramatically increases available organs while still respecting individual choice. The question of reciprocity also matters. Should people who refuse to donate organs be given lower priority for receiving them? It seems fair. If you're not willing to give, why should you receive? But it also seems cruel to deny someone a life-saving transplant because of their religious or philosophical beliefs. Israel implemented a unique solution. Registered donors and their families get priority points if they ever need a transplant. It's not quite mandatory, but it creates an incentive for reciprocity. These practical questions reveal deeper philosophical ones. Is organ donation supererogatory, going above and beyond moral duty, or is it obligatory, something we must do? Is your body truly yours after death, or does it belong to the community? Can we commodify organs without commodifying human beings? What's clear is this: when you choose to donate organs, you're making a statement about what matters. You're saying that preserving life outweighs preserving a corpse. That connection between humans transcends death. That your body, which served you in life, can serve others in death. It's a beautiful idea. But it's not the only beautiful idea, and that's the tension we must hold. Chapter 5, The Sanctity Argument. Now let's seriously engage with the opposition to organ donation. Because there are thoughtful, principled reasons why someone might refuse to donate organs or oppose the practice. These aren't just superstitions to be dismissed. They're rooted in deep convictions about human dignity and the sacred. Start with the concept of bodily integrity. Many religious and philosophical traditions teach that the human body is not merely biological machinery. It's sacred, made in the image of God, infused with dignity that persists even after death. To dismember it, even for good reasons, is desecration. Rabbi Moses Tendler, a prominent Orthodox Jewish authority, initially opposed organ donation on these grounds. The body, he argued, is on loan from God. We have no right to mutilate it. Jewish law requires burial of the entire body, including amputated limbs and extracted teeth. How then could we justify removing vital organs? This isn't arbitrary squeamishness. It reflects a worldview where matter itself is sacred, where creation bears the fingerprints of the Creator, where we show reverence through careful treatment of physical things. In this view, burning a holy book or desecrating a body isn't just impractical, it's spiritually wrong. Consider the Islamic concern about bodily resurrection. While many Muslims support organ donation, others worry about the Day of Judgment. The Quran describes how bodies will be resurrected and reunited with souls. Does God need your original organs for this? Logically, an omnipotent being shouldn't. But the concern reveals something important. For believers, death isn't the end of your body's story. Its final state matters. The same concern appears in some Christian thought. Although most Christians accept that God can resurrect any body regardless of its condition, the symbolism matters. Burial traditions developed over centuries reflect beliefs about honoring the dead and preparing them for resurrection. Changing these practices feels like abandoning sacred wisdom. Then there's the argument about the commodification of the body. Once we start treating body parts as transferable resources, do we open the door to treating humans as mere collections of useful materials? The bioethicist, Leon Kass, warns against what he calls the tyranny of the practical. Yes, organ donation saves lives, but at what cost to our sense of the sacred? There's also legitimate concern about how death is defined. Brain death wasn't recognized as legal death until 1968. Before organ transplantation became medically possible, we didn't need to harvest organs from bodies with beating hearts. The cynic might say, we redefined death to make transplantation easier. Did medical need drive our definition of when life ends? Some critics point to cases where brain death diagnoses were wrong. Rare, yes, but documented. If even one person was declared dead prematurely so their organs could be harvested, doesn't that justify caution? The philosopher Hans Jonas argued we should err on the side of protecting potential life, even if it means fewer organs for transplantation. There's also the slippery slope argument. If we normalize extracting organs from the dead, might we eventually pressure the poor or vulnerable to sell organs while alive? Might we euthanize people earlier to harvest fresher organs? These fears aren't paranoid. Black market organ trafficking exists. Organ tourism is real. The poor in some countries do sell kidneys to survive, maintaining bright lines between life and death, between persons and property, between voluntary donation and coerced extraction. These boundaries protect the vulnerable. Maybe, some argue, it's better to lose some medical benefits than to risk sliding down a slope toward treating humans as spare parts. Finally, there's the argument for moral pluralism. In a diverse society, we must respect different values and worldviews. Not everyone shares the secular utilitarian framework that sees organ donation as obviously good. For some, Religious law isn't just personal preference, it's divine command. Compelling or heavily pressuring people to violate their sacred convictions is a form of tyranny, even if well-intentioned. The philosopher Michael Sandel argues that some things shouldn't have a price or even be subject to utilitarian calculation. Maybe the human body after death is one of those things. Maybe we should accept that some lives will be lost, rather than violate deeply held beliefs about the sacred. These arguments deserve respect. They remind us that saving lives, as important as it is, isn't the only value that matters. Dignity, sanctity, respect for tradition, protection of the vulnerable, these matter too. The question is how to balance them. Chapter 6, The Crisis of Scarcity. Here's the brutal reality that makes this debate so urgent. People are dying right now because we don't have enough organs. The gap between supply and demand is massive and growing. Let's look at the numbers, because they're staggering. In the United States, someone is added to the organ transplant waiting list every 9 minutes. Over 100,000 people are waiting right now. But only about 46,000 transplants happen each year. That means the list grows longer every day. And every day, about 17 people on that list die waiting. Globally, the numbers are even worse. The World Health Organization estimates that organ transplants represent less than 10% of global need. In most of the world, if you need a kidney transplant, you're probably going to die waiting for one. Why is there such a shortage? One reason is that relatively few people die in ways that make organ donation possible. You need brain death with circulatory support, or very recent cardiac death. Most people die gradually from disease, in ways that damage organs before death occurs. But the bigger reason is that most potential donors don't donate. In countries with opt-in systems, where you must actively register as a donor, rates are shockingly low. In Germany, only 36% of people consent to donation. In the UK, it was 38% before they switched to opt-out, even in families where the deceased had registered as a donor. About 30% of families override that decision and refuse donation. Grief, confusion, religious concerns, and distrust of the medical system all play roles. This creates a genuine moral crisis. We have the medical technology to save lives. We have bodies that will otherwise be buried or burned, but we don't have consent. And people die because of it. Some bioethicists argue for presumed consent, the opt-out system. Make everyone a donor by default, unless they actively object. This respects autonomy while dramatically increasing available organs. Wales implemented this and saw donation rates increase by 25%. But critics call this coercive. True consent requires active choice, not passive acceptance of default options. And in practice, families still often refuse, even under opt-out systems, because hospitals are reluctant to take organs over family objections. Others propose a required choice. Make everyone declare their preference when getting a driver's license or filing taxes. No default option. You must actively choose yes or no. This respects autonomy while ensuring everyone makes a decision. Then there's the market solution. Why not allow people to sell organs, either after death or, for kidneys, while alive? Standard economics says if demand exceeds supply, increase the price. Paying for organs would increase supply and save lives. Most ethicists and religious authorities reject this absolutely. The National Organ Transplant Act of 1984 made organ sales illegal in the U.S. The argument is that body parts shouldn't be commodities. The poor would be exploited. Wealthy people would have unfair advantages. Human dignity would be violated. But economist Gary Becker won a Nobel Prize, partly for arguing that organ markets, if carefully regulated, could save lives without exploitation. Iran has a legal kidney market and has virtually no waiting list for kidney transplants. Is that exploitation or liberation? The scarcity crisis also creates horrifying realities. Desperate patients travel to other countries for black market transplants. Organs are stolen from executed prisoners in some nations. Trafficking networks exploit the vulnerable. When legal, ethical systems fail to provide enough organs, illegal, unethical ones fill the gap. There's another possibility: artificial organs and xenotransplantation, using animal organs. Scientists are growing organs from stem cells, engineering pig organs with human-compatible genetics, and developing mechanical replacements. Maybe technology will eventually make the whole debate obsolete. But that's years or decades away. Right now, today, someone will die waiting for an organ that could have saved them. That's not hypothetical. It's happening as you watch this. This scarcity forces an impossible question. Whose fault is it when someone dies for lack of an organ? Is it the fault of people who refuse to donate? Is it the fault of a system that makes donation opt-in rather than opt-out? Is it the fault of religions that discourage donation? Or is it nobody's fault, just a tragedy with no villain? The philosopher Peter Singer would say that if you can prevent something bad from happening at minimal cost to yourself, you ought to do it. Being dead costs you nothing. Donating your organs costs you nothing. Therefore, refusing to donate while people die is morally equivalent to letting someone drown while you stand on shore with a life preserver. But that argument only works if you accept that the dead have no interests worth protecting, that bodies have no sacred significance, that individual autonomy doesn't extend beyond life. Not everyone accepts those premises. The scarcity crisis won't resolve the philosophical and religious debates, but it raises the stakes enormously. This isn't just abstract ethics. People's lives hang in the balance. Chapter 7, Finding Middle Ground. So where does this leave us? We've seen compelling arguments on all sides. We've confronted genuine moral dilemmas with no easy answers. Is there any middle ground? Any way to honor both science and faith, both the living and the dead? I think there is, but it requires nuance, humility, and mutual respect. Let me suggest several principles that might guide us. First, recognize that this is genuinely difficult. Both sides in this debate are motivated by profound values. People who support organ donation care about compassion, saving lives, and alleviating suffering. People who oppose it care about human dignity, sacred tradition, and protecting the vulnerable. These are all good values. The tragedy is that they sometimes conflict. So step 1 is intellectual humility. Stop treating the other side as ignorant or evil. The religious person who refuses organ donation isn't a superstitious primitive. The secular person who supports it isn't a soulless materialist. They're both trying to do what's right according to their deepest convictions. Second, maximize informed choice. The current system in most places is deeply flawed. Most people never seriously think about organ donation until a crisis forces the issue. Then families must make rush decisions during their worst moments of grief. We should normalize conversations about end-of-life wishes. Discuss organ donation with family. Put your preferences in writing. Make sure your loved ones know what you want. This isn't morbid, it's responsible. It prevents your family from having to guess what you would have wanted. Third, respect religious and cultural diversity. An opt-out system might increase donation rates, but it feels coercive to people whose traditions require active consent for bodily interventions. A pure opt-in system respects autonomy, but costs lives. Maybe the solution is layered. Default to opt-in with robust education. Make it easy to opt out. Honor religious exemptions. Create incentives for donation without compulsion. Israel's priority system is one model. Singapore offers funeral cost reimbursements for donor families. Fourth, improve the system to make donation more compatible with religious practice. For example, some Jewish authorities oppose donation because it delays burial beyond the traditional 24 hours. But rapid organ recovery protocols can often allow burial within that time frame. Better coordination between transplant teams and religious communities could address practical obstacles. Similarly, Islamic concerns about mutilating the body could be addressed through surgical techniques that minimize disruption and through fatwas from respected authorities, affirming that saving life takes precedence. Many Muslim countries have successfully increased donation rates through religious education that emphasizes the principle of saving life. Fifth, invest in alternatives. The scarcity crisis would be less urgent if we had better options. Fund research into artificial organs, xenotransplantation, and regenerative medicine. Improve prevention and treatment of organ failure. Reduce the demand side while we debate the supply side. Sixth, be honest about the limits of both science and faith. Science can tell us how to transplant organs successfully. It cannot tell us whether we should. That requires values, ethics, and often faith. But faith cannot ignore scientific realities about suffering and death. The best approach integrates both. The philosopher William James wrote about the will to believe. He argued that on questions science cannot definitively answer, we're entitled to let our values guide us. Organ donation is such a question. Science tells us it's medically possible and beneficial, but whether it's morally obligatory, permissible, or forbidden depends on deeper commitments about human nature, the afterlife, and our duties to each other. Different people will reach different conclusions, and that's okay. What's not okay is dismissing those who disagree with us as stupid or wicked. Seventh, consider a both-and approach, rather than either-or. Maybe the question isn't organ donation for science or faith, but how can organ donation serve both science and faith? For many religious people, saving lives is itself a sacred act. Donation becomes an expression of faith, not a betrayal of it. Robbie Tendler, whom I mentioned earlier, as opposing donation, eventually changed his position. He concluded that saving life is so paramount in Judaism that organ donation is not just permitted but required. His faith led him to embrace what science made possible. Similarly, Catholic teaching frames donation as charity, a final act of Christian love. Islamic scholars who support donation cite the Quranic principle of saving humanity. Hindu and Buddhist support for donation flows from the values of compassion and non-attachment. Faith can motivate donation, not just oppose it. The middle ground then is this: respect individual conscience, maximize informed choice. Accommodate religious practice where possible, invest in alternatives, and recognize that people of good faith and good reason can disagree. We don't have to resolve every philosophical question to move forward. We just have to make space for multiple perspectives while doing our best to reduce suffering and honor human dignity. Chapter 8. Your decision matters. Let's bring this home. At some point, you will face this decision. Maybe you already have. Either you'll decide whether to register as an organ donor, or you'll help make that decision for a loved one, or you'll watch someone you care about wait desperately for a transplant. This is not abstract. It's your life. So what should you do? I can't answer that for you, but I can help you think it through. Start by examining your deepest beliefs. What do you think happens after death? If you believe in an afterlife, does the state of your physical body matter there? If you believe death is the end of consciousness, does it make sense to prevent your organs from helping others? What does your faith tradition actually teach? Not just what you've casually heard, but what scholars and authorities in your tradition say. You might be surprised. Many people assume their religion forbids organ donation, when it actually permits or encourages it. Talk to your family. What matters to them? What would bring them comfort if you died? Would knowing you save lives ease their grief, or would the idea of your body being dissected cause additional pain? Their feelings matter, especially since they'll likely be involved in the final decision. Consider your values. What kind of person do you want to be? If generosity, compassion, and helping others are central to your identity, how does that apply here? If tradition, piety, and bodily integrity are central, how do you honor those? Think about reciprocity. If you or someone you love needed an organ transplant, would you accept one? If yes, doesn't that create some obligation to provide organs to others? If no, that's consistent, but are you prepared for the consequences? Imagine your own death. I know, it's uncomfortable. But picture yourself gone, your consciousness ended, your body in a hospital. If those organs could give sight to a blind person, a new kidney to a child, a heart to a parent of young children, would you want that to happen? Or would you want your body untouched, buried whole, returned to the earth intact? There's no objectively correct answer. But there's your answer, based on your beliefs, values, and convictions. Honor that. Make your decision and communicate it clearly. Don't leave your family guessing. If you decide to donate, register officially. In the U.S., you can register at organdonor.gov. Sign your driver's license. Put it in your will. Tell your family directly. Studies show that when families know their loved one wants to donate, they almost always honor that wish. If you decide not to donate, that's your right, but consider whether there are conditions under which you might. Some people who object to donating to strangers would donate to family members. Some who object on religious grounds would donate if a religious authority approved. Think through the nuances. And remember, you can change your mind. Your views might evolve. Your faith might deepen or shift. Your experiences might alter your perspective. The person dying on a transplant waiting list might be someone you know. Stay open to reconsidering. One more thing, organ donation is not the only way to help. If you can't donate organs for religious or personal reasons, consider donating blood, plasma, or bone marrow. Volunteer at hospitals. Support medical research. Advocate for better healthcare access. There are many ways to reduce suffering and save lives. The philosopher William McCaskill argues for effective altruism, using evidence and reason to do the most good possible. Organ donation is incredibly effective altruism. One decision, minimal cost to you, maximum benefit to others. Few choices we make have such asymmetric positive impact, but McCaskill would also say, do what you can sustain. If forcing yourself to donate organs despite deep religious conviction would damage your spiritual well-being, that cost matters too. Find the intersection of effectiveness and integrity. Whatever you decide, decide consciously. Don't just drift into a default. This matters too much. Conclusion: we've journeyed through science, religion, and philosophy. We've heard from medical experts, theologians, and ethicists. We've confronted the shortage of organs and the surplus of suffering. We've examined arguments for donation and against it. We've looked for middle ground. What have we learned? That this is hard, that reasonable, caring, thoughtful people disagree. That both saves lives and honors the dead matter. That our choices reveal what we truly believe about human dignity, the sacred, and our obligations to each other. We have learned that science has given us extraordinary power to defeat death, but has untold us whether we should use it in every case. We have learned that faith offers profound wisdom about human dignity, but must reckon with the reality of preventable suffering. We have learned that philosophy clarifies the questions even when it can't settle the answers. Most importantly, we've learned that your voice matters in this conversation. This isn't just for experts and authorities. It's for every person who will die someday and every person who loves someone who will die. It's for you. The title of this documentary posed a choice: donation of organs for science or faith. But maybe that's a false dichotomy. Maybe the deepest science affirms the sanctity of life. Maybe the truest faith expresses itself through compassion. Maybe the answer isn't choosing between them, but integrating them. Or maybe some people will choose science, and others will choose faith, and will respect both choices while doing our best to reduce the suffering caused by scarcity. I don't know which is right, but I know that asking the question seriously, examining the evidence honestly, and respecting those who disagree is the path to wisdom. And if this video expanded your understanding, if it made you see yourself differently, then do me a favor, share it. Hit subscribe. Join this community of people who refuse to accept easy answers, who dig deeper, who approach mystery with logic but remain open to spirit. Thank you for watching.